So from the highest possible topic of consciousness to the to the lowest level topic of David Goggins, let's
I don't
go.
know if it's low level. He's high performance.
High performance,
Right.
but like low, like there's no, I don't think David has any time for philosophy. Let's just put it this way. Uh,
Well, I mean, I think we can tack it to what we were just saying in a meaningful way, which
Sure.
is whatever goes on in that abstraction part of the brain,
Mhm.
he's figured out how to dig down in whatever the limbic friction,
Yeah.
he's figured out how to grab a hold of that, scruff it, and send it in the direction that he's decided it needs to go. And what's wild is that what we're talking about is him doing that to himself, right? It's like he's scruffing himself and directing himself in a particular direction and sending himself down that trajectory. And what's beautiful is that he acknowledges that that process is not pretty. It doesn't feel good. It's kind of horrible at every level, but he's created this rewarding element to it. And I think that's what's it's so admirable, and it's what so many people crave, which is regulation of the self at that level.
And he practices. I mean, there's a ritual to it. There's every single day, like no exceptions. There's a practice aspect to the suffering that he goes through.
It's principled suffering.
Principled suffering.
It is.
And I mean, I admire all aspects of it, including him and his girlfriend slash wife. I'm not sure. Should probably know this.
I don't know.
Fiance.
Wonderful person.
I'm not asking him.
No. We've only communicated. I've only communicated with her via text about some stuff. I was asking David, but yeah, they clearly have formed a powerful team.
Yeah.
And it's
Good cop and
it's a
bad
beautiful
cop.
thing to see people working in that kind of synergy.
It's inspiring to me, same as with Elon, that a guy like David Goggins can find love. That you find a thing that works, which gives me hope that like whatever flavor of crazy I am, you can always find another thing that works with that. But I've had maybe let's trade Goggins stories. You from a neuroscience perspective, me from a self-inflicted pain perspective. I somehow found myself in communication with David about some challenges that I was undergoing. One of which is we were communicating every single day, email, phone, about a particular 30-day challenge that I did that stretched for longer, of push-ups and pull-ups.
You made a call out on social
Yeah,
media.
social media. It was
Actually,
dumb.
I think that
All
was
of it was
the
dumb.
point. I knew of you before, but that's where I started tracking some of what you were doing with these physical challenges. And
Yeah. The hell's wrong with that guy?
well, no, I think I don't often comment on people's stuff, but I think I commented something like neuroplasticity loves a non-negotiable rule. No, I said a non-negotiable contract. Because
That's a good
at the
line.
point where, yeah,
That's a good line.
neuroplasticity really loves a non-negotiable contract because, and I've said this before, so forgive me, but, the brain is doing analysis of duration, path, and outcome. And that's a lot of work for the brain. And the more that it can pass off duration, path, and outcome to just reflex, the more energy it can allocate to other things. So if you decide, there's no negotiation about how many push-ups, how far I'm going to run, how many days, how many pull-ups, etc. You actually have more energy for push-ups, running, and pull-ups.
And when you say neuroplasticity, you mean like the brain, once the decision is made, it'll start rewiring stuff to make sure that we can actually make this happen.
That's right. I mean, so much of what we do is reflexive at the level of just core circuitry, breathing, heart rate, all that boring stuff, digestion. Yeah. But then there's a lot of reflexive stuff like how you drink out of a mug of coffee that's reflexive too, but that you had to learn at some point in your life earlier when you were very little, analyzing duration, path, and outcome. And that involved a lot of top-down processing with the prefrontal cortex. But through plasticity mechanisms, you now do it. So when you take on a challenge, provided that you understand the core mechanics of how to, run push-ups and pull-ups and whatever else you decided to do, once you set the number and the duration and all that, then all you have to do is just go. But people get caught in that tide pool of just well, do I really have to do it? How do I not do that? What if I get injured? What if I, can I sneak a this or that, and that's work.
Yeah.
And to some extent, I not David Goggins, obviously, nor do I claim to understand his process, partially, but maybe a little bit, which is that it's clear that by making the decision, there's more resources to devote to the effort of the actual execution.
Well, that's a really, like what you're saying was not a lesson that was obvious to me, and it's still not obvious. It's something I really work at, which is there is always an option to quit. And I mean, that's something I really struggle with. I mean, I've quit some things in my life, just like stupid stuff. And one lesson I've learned is if you quit once, it opens the door that, like, it's really valuable to trick your brain into thinking that you're gonna have to die before you quit. Like, it's actually really convenient. So actually what you're saying is very profound, but you shouldn't intellectualize it. Like, it took me time to develop, like, out psychologically, in ways that I think it would be another conversation, because I'm not sure how to put it into words, but it's really tough on me to do certain parts of that challenge.
Well, it was a huge output.
The number that, I thought it would be, the number would be hard, but it's not. It's the entirety of it, especially in the early days, was just spending. I'm kind of embarrassed to say how many hours this took. So I didn't say publicly how many hours, because I knew people would be like, aren't you supposed to do other stuff? Like,
well, it's
the hell are you doing?
Again, I don't want to speculate too much about, but occasionally David has said this publicly, where people will be like, "Don't you sleep or something?"
Yeah.
And his process used to just be that he would just block, delete,
Yeah.
like gone. But it's actually it's a super interesting topic, and because self-control and directing our actions and the role of emotion and quitting, these are vital to the human experience, and they're vital to performing well at anything. And at a high, obviously at a super high level, being able to understand this about the self is crucial. So I have a friend who was also in the teams. His name is Pat Dossett. He did 9 years in the SEAL teams. And in a similar way, there's a lore about him among team guys, because of a kind of funny challenge he gave himself, which was, so he and I swim together, although he swims further up front than I do, and he's very patient. But he was he was assigned when he was in the teams to a position that gave him a little more time behind a desk than he wanted, and not as much time out in deployments, although he did deployments. So he didn't know what to do at that time, but he thought about it, and he asked himself, what does he hate the most? Mm-hmm. And it turns out the thing that he hated doing the most was bear crawls, walking on your hands and knees. So he decided to bear crawl for a mile for time. So he was bear crawling a mile a day, right? And I thought that was an interesting example they gave, because, like, why pick the thing you hate the most? And I think it maps right back to limbic friction. It's the thing that creates the most limbic friction. And so if you can overcome that, then there's carryover. And I think the notion of carryover has been talked about psychologically and kind of in the self-help space, like, oh, if you run a marathon, it's going to help you in other areas of life. But will it really? Will it? Well, I think it depends on whether or not there's a lot of limbic friction, because if there is, what you're exercising is not a circuit for bear crawls or a circuit for pull-ups. What you're doing is you're exercising a circuit for top-down control. And that circuit was not designed to be for bear crawls or pull-ups or coding or waking up in the middle of the night to do something hard. That circuit was designed to override limbic friction. And so neural circuits were designed to generalize, right? The stress response to an incoming threat that's a physical threat was designed to feel the same way and be the same response internally as the threat to an impending exam or divorce or marriage or whatever it is that's stressing somebody out. And so neural circuits are not designed to be for one particular action or purpose. So if you can, as you did, if you can train up top-down control under conditions of the highest limbic friction, that when the desire to quit is at its utmost, either because of fatigue or hyperarousal, being too stressed or too tired. You're learning how to engage a circuit, and that circuit is forever with you. And if you don't engage it, it sits there, but it's atrophied. It's like a plant that doesn't get any water. And a lot of this has been discussed in self-help and growth mindset and all these kinds of ideas that circle the internet and social media. But when you start to think about how they map to neural circuits, I think there's some utility, because what it means is that the limbic friction that you'll experience in, I don't know, maybe some future relationship to something or someone, it's a category of neural processing that should immediately click into place. It's just like the limbic friction you experienced trying to engage in the God knows how many push-ups, pull-ups, and running runs you were doing.
25,000. Who's counting?
So, folks, if Lex does this again, more comments, more likes.
No, well,
this is the problem with you getting more followers, is you're going to
get more. Yeah.
Actually, I should say that's the benefit. I don't know, maybe it's not politically correct for me to ask, but like there is this stereotype about Russians being,
politically correct.
No, like being really durable. And I started going to that Russian banya that way back before COVID, and they could tolerate a lot of heat, and they would sit very stoic, no one was going, oh, it's hot in here. They would just kind of like ease into it. So maybe there's something there. Who knows?
Might be something there, but it could be also just personal. I just have I found myself, everyone's different, but I've found myself to be able to do something unpleasant for very long periods of time. Like I'm able to shut off the mind, and I don't think that's been fully tested. And I
monkey mind or the supercomputer?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, which mind tells you to quit exactly?
Limbic friction tells you.
Well, the limbic friction is the source of that, but who are you talking with exactly?
So there's we can put something very concrete to that. So there's a paper published in Cell, super top tier journal, 2 years ago, looking at effort. And this was in a visual environment of trying to swim forward toward a target and a reward. And it was a really cool experiment because they manipulated virtually the visual environment. So the same amount of effort was being expended every time, but sometimes the perception was you're making forward progress, and sometimes the perception was you're making no progress because stuff wasn't drifting by, meant no progress. So you could be swimming and swimming and not making progress. And it turns out that with each bout of effort, there's a epinephrine and norepinephrine is being released in the brainstem. And glia, these what traditionally were thought of as support cells for the neurons, but they do a lot of things actively too, are measuring the amount of epinephrine and norepinephrine in that circuit. And when it exceeds a certain threshold, the glia send inhibitory signals that shut down top-down control. It's you quit, you stop. There's no more, you quit enduring. It can be rescued. Endurance can be rescued with dopamine. So that's where the subjective part really comes into play. So you quit because you've learned how to turn that off, or you've learned how to, some people will reward the pain process so much that friction becomes the reward. And when you talk about people like Goggins and other people I know from special operations, and people who've gone through cancer treatments 3 times, you hear about, just when you hear about people, the Viktor Frankl stories, I mean, you hear about Nelson Mandela, you hear about these stories, I'm sure the same process is involved. Again, this speaks to the generalizability of these processes as opposed to a neural circuit for a particular action or cognitive function. So I think you have to learn to subjectively self-reward in a way that replenishes you. Goggins talks about eating souls. It's a very dramatic example. In his mind, apparently, that's a form of reward, but it's not just a form of reward where you're picking up a trophy or something. It's actually, it gives you energy. It's a reward that gives more neural energy. And I'm defining that as more dopamine to suppress the noradrenaline and adrenaline circuits in the brainstem.
So it ultimately maps to that. Yeah, he creates enemies. He's always fighting enemies. I think I have enemies, but they're usually just versions of me inside my head. So I thought about through that 30-day challenge, I tried to come up with like fake enemies. It wasn't working. The only enemy I came up with is David.
Well, now you have
me off.
you certainly have a formidable adversary in this one.
I don't care. I'm David. I'm willing to die on this one. So let's go there. But
let's hope you both survive this this one.
Well,
But
my problem is the physical. There's so everything we've been talking about in the mind. There's a physical aspect that's just practically difficult, which is like I can't when you injure yourself at a certain point, like you just can't function.
Or you're doing more damage.
Yeah,
you're talking about it, taking yourself out of running for
for the rest of your life potentially, or or for years. So, I'd love to avoid that. Right? There's just like stupid physical stuff that you just want to avoid. You want to keep it purely in the mental, and if it's purely in the mental, that's when the race is interesting. But yeah, the problem with these physical challenges, as David has experienced, I mean, it has a toll on your body. I tend to think of the mind as limitless and the body is kind of, unfortunately, quite limited.
Well, I think the key is to dynamically control your output. And that can be done by reducing effort, which doesn't work throughout, but also by restoring through these subjective reward processes. Yeah. And we don't want to go down the rabbit hole of why this all works, but these are ancient pathways that were designed to bring resources to an animal or to a person through foraging for hunting or mates or water or all these things. And they work so well because they're down in those circuits where we know the zeros and ones. And that's great because it can be subjective at the level of, oh, I reached this one milestone, this one horizon, this 1 3-meter target. But if you don't reward it, it's just effort. If you do self-reward it, it's effort -1 in terms of the adrenaline output.